In the sleek, white marble lobby of the prestigious Sylvestre Corporation, a black woman, Amara Grant, greeted a visitor with an elegant, fluid motion of her hands. She communicated in sign language, unaware that her every move was being observed by none other than the CEO himself. The polished floors reflected the corporate perfection that the company prided itself on, but there was a more insidious side to this supposed professionalism. The receptionist, Emily Taylor, looked at the deaf visitor with a practiced smile, though it was clear from the way her eyebrows twitched that she was irritated by the disruption. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't quite understand you," Emily said, her voice betraying the subtle condescension of someone used to a perfectly orchestrated routine. The man, dressed in an impeccable suit, gestured once again with visible frustration. His hands danced in the air, speaking a language that seemed to have no place in this corporate world. His shoulders sagged as the familiar sting of exclusion took hold, a feeling that many, like him, knew all too well. Amara Grant, an intern at Sylvestre for just 3 months, watched from across the room. She was balancing a tray laden with expensive coffees, one of the many tasks that kept her hidden in plain sight. This was the corporate world she had been thrust into, a world of polished facades, empty pleasantries, and a fierce resistance to anything that disturbed the flow of power. But today, she could not look away from the injustice unfolding before her. The deaf man, clearly in need of help, was being ignored simply because he was perceived as a nuisance. Amara's feet moved before her mind could catch up. She set the tray down gently on a nearby table and, without a second thought, approached the counter where the man was struggling. With a calmness she didn't fully understand, she raised her hands and signed with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting each movement. "Hello, sir. How can I assist you?" she signed, her fingers weaving the words that her voice could not convey. The man's face lit up as if someone had flipped a switch in a dark room. "Thank you," he signed back, his movements animated with genuine relief. "I thought no one here would understand me." The atmosphere in the lobby shifted immediately. Conversation slowed to a halt, footsteps grew hesitant, and every eye in the room was drawn to this unexpected moment. A young intern, a black woman, was conversing fluently in sign language with a visitor who had been dismissed as an inconvenience only moments earlier. It was a small act of kindness, but one that spoke volumes about the nature of this corporate world. What Amara didn't know was that her actions had already captured the attention of Lawrence Sylvestre, the company's CEO. Emerging from the executive elevator, his sharp eyes took in every detail of the scene. Known for his icy demeanor and his ability to size up anyone within seconds, Lawrence's gaze now sharpened, not in disdain, but in quiet fascination. He was witnessing something he had unknowingly been searching for, a moment of humanity in an otherwise cold, corporate machine. Across the room, Victoria Langston, the marketing director, watched with narrowed eyes. Her lips curled into a sneer as she assessed the situation. Insecurity and disdain mixed within her, like oil and water. She saw Amara's act of kindness as a challenge, an interruption to the perfectly controlled environment she had spent years cultivating. It was not the act itself, but the potential disruption to the established hierarchy that made her uneasy. Victoria's mind quickly raced, calculating how she could twist this moment into a lesson for everyone present. A lesson on knowing one's place. What Victoria didn't know was that her next move would spark a chain of events that no one, especially her, could have anticipated. Amara's hands dropped, signaling that the conversation had ended. She turned to walk back to her tray when Victoria's voice cut through the silence, sharp and biting. Well, what a touching scene," she sneered, her words echoing across the lobby like the sound of a blade slicing through the air. "How adorable," Victoria mocked, her gaze focused on Amara with thinly veiled contempt. Amara's stomach dropped as the eyes of the lobby shifted to her, many of them from the very executives who had previously paid her no mind. Victoria approached, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step purposeful, each one a countdown to public humiliation. "I'm sorry to interrupt this performance," she continued with a cruel smile. "But we have protocols in this company. Interns do not interpret for clients. That's why we have certified professionals." The deaf visitor, still confused, looked between the two women, his confusion deepening as the tension in the air became palpable. Amara quickly signed. I apologize, sir. It seems I overstepped my bounds. Victoria's smile grew, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes as she addressed Amara directly. Jasmine, isn't it? 3 months here, and already thinking you're indispensable? How ambitious. Amara felt the sting of the word ambitious like a slap in the face. She fought to keep her voice steady as she responded. I was just trying to help. He needed help, and I was here. Victoria's laughter was cold and sharp, the sound bouncing off the walls. A few hand gestures aren't going to impress anyone here. Do you really think you've done something extraordinary? The receptionist, Emily, exchanged a satisfied glance with Victoria, clearly enjoying the spectacle of Amara's humiliation. More employees began to gather, drawn by the drama unfolding before them, while Amara stood her ground, determined not to let this moment break her. But Victoria, sensing victory, wasn't finished. You know, Jasmine, she said, her voice dripping with mockery. Your job here is to fetch coffee, make copies, and stay invisible until you've earned the right to have an opinion. Amara's eyes flickered, a silent challenge in her gaze. She had spent her whole life being underestimated because of her race, her background, and her gender. But she wasn't about to let this moment define her. She'd learned to survive by playing the long game. With deliberate calm, she turned to the deaf man and signed. It was an honor to help you. I hope you find exactly what you're looking for here. Her movements were fluid and confident, the result of years of practice, not just in sign language, but in learning to navigate spaces where people like her weren't meant to belong. The deaf man smiled, and in return, he signed something that caught Amara off guard. You don't have to apologize for kindness. Thank you. When she translated his words, some of the onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Not all eyes were on Victoria anymore. Victoria was not one to be outdone, and she quickly regained her composure. How dramatic, she sneered, but her confidence had waned slightly. The lobby had turned into a stage for an unexpected clash, and Amara's steady composure was starting to chip away at the foundation of the narrative Victoria had been trying to weave. Then, just as Victoria was about to continue her tirade, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and out stepped Lawrence Sylvestre, his sharp eyes locking onto the scene before him. The room fell silent as he walked toward the small group, his presence alone demanding attention. Amara froze, her heart skipping a beat. Had he witnessed everything? Excuse me, Victoria, Lawrence said, his voice cutting through the tension. I believe I've already found the perfect interpreter. The room stilled, and all eyes turned to Lawrence as he addressed Amara. Jasmine, join me for a meeting. It seems you are exactly the person we need for this project. Victoria's face paled as she realized that her moment of triumph had just slipped away. Lawrence's gaze, though calm, carried the weight of authority. And for the first time, Amara saw something in his eyes that wasn't just about corporate power. It was recognition. As she walked toward the elevator with Lawrence, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. Not because of what had just happened, but because she knew that sometimes you have to wait for the right moment to reveal who you really are. As the elevator doors closed behind Amara, the weight of the moment began to sink in. The brief exchange with Lawrence Sylvestre had thrown her into a whirlwind of thoughts. She had entered this company as an intern, a mere cog in the massive machine of Sylvestre Corporation. Yet, in a few minutes, she had been recognized not only for her skills but for her integrity. Victoria Langston, meanwhile, was seething in her office, drafting emails with trembling fingers. The internal political game she had been playing was crumbling, and she could feel the ground slipping beneath her. She had assumed that the humiliation of an intern would be a simple matter to sweep under the rug. After all, in her mind, she was untouchable, secure in her position, and unbothered by anyone beneath her. But Amara's quiet resistance had cracked that illusion wide open. Favors, Victoria muttered to herself as she tapped away at her keyboard. This is about nothing more than favoritism. They've all bought into it. In the depths of her self-righteous indignation, she failed to realize the danger of underestimating the young intern who, unbeknownst to her, had already started turning the tables. Amara, on the other hand, was still trying to process what had just happened. Lawrence's words about the meeting, his calm confidence, and the subtle respect he had shown her, none of it seemed real. But the door was now open, and with it came the chance to prove herself in a way she never expected. Are you okay? Lawrence's voice brought her back to reality. Amara looked up at him, still standing at the entrance of the elevator. His expression had softened, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her aware of the gravity of the situation. She nodded, but her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "I'm fine. Just trying to process everything." "We've got a lot to talk about," Lawrence said, his tone shifting from professional to something warmer, almost paternal. "But there's one thing you should know. What happened today, what you did for that man, wasn't just kindness. It was intelligence. And that's the kind of talent I value here." The elevator descended quietly, and Amara's thoughts raced. She had always known she was capable of more than the world often allowed her to show. She had honed skills, both in language and resilience, that had been shaped by her experiences, not just in school or her internship, but in the very real, often cruel world outside. What she was now beginning to understand was that Lawrence Sylvestre wasn't just another CEO, trying to maintain the status quo. He had seen something in her that no one else had. He'd recognized the potential that others had dismissed as nothing more than an intern's ambition. As they reached the conference room, Amara took a seat across from Lawrence. The walls of the room, lined with sleek, modern art, did little to soften the corporate coldness of the space. Yet, there was a quiet sense of power here, and it wasn't just about the money or the influence. It was the way Lawrence carried himself. Calm, deliberate, a man who had built empires on a foundation of sharp observation and strategic thinking. "So," Lawrence began, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me about yourself, Amara. I want to know what drives you. Why do you think you've made it this far in such a short time?" Amara took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I didn't think I'd make it here," she said honestly. "But I've always been determined. I've had to be. Growing up, it was always about proving that I could do things no one thought I could. Being underestimated, overlooked, it's something you learn to live with. But you also learn how to use it to your advantage." Lawrence nodded, his eyes narrowing as he took in her words. "Tell me more about how that plays into your work here. Because the way you handled yourself today, the way you communicated with that man, it wasn't just a show of kindness. It was a show of power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be heard." Amara hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a new sense of clarity. "I think it's about recognizing that people like me, people who aren't given a chance to shine, can often see things from a different angle. We learn to be adaptable, resourceful, and we don't rely on the systems that are supposed to hold us up. We create our own." Lawrence smiled slightly, a rare flicker of genuine approval crossing his face. "I like that," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're exactly the kind of person we need here. Not just someone who follows the rules, but someone who can rewrite them when necessary." Before Amara could respond, the door opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit walked in. He was accompanied by another woman, both of them exuding an air of authority that instantly made the room feel smaller. "This is Diego Martinez," Lawrence said, gesturing toward the man. "He's one of the top accessibility consultants in the country. And the reason you're here today." Diego extended a hand toward Amara, his expression warm yet professional. "I've heard a lot about you, Amara. Your interpretation today was exceptional. But more importantly, your ability to understand not just the words, but the intent behind them. It's rare." Amara shook his hand, her mind still processing the sudden shift in her role. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I've always believed that communication is more than just words. It's about connecting on a deeper level." "Exactly," Diego agreed, nodding. "That's why I'm here. We're launching a national accessibility program, and we need someone who can help lead it. Someone with the vision to take it beyond just the basics of compliance. Someone like you." Amara felt her pulse quicken as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just an opportunity to prove herself. It was a chance to change the entire industry. To lead a movement that could reshape how corporations viewed accessibility, diversity, and inclusion. "I'm in," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." Lawrence exchanged a glance with Diego, both of them clearly impressed by her determination. "Good," Lawrence said, "because I have a feeling you're about to show us all how it's done." As the meeting continued, Amara listened closely, her mind racing with the possibilities. This was her moment. She had already been underestimated, humiliated, and written off. But now, she had the power to flip the script. And with it, She would build a legacy that no one would ever be able to ignore. Meanwhile, Victoria Langston was completely unaware of the storm that was brewing. Still reeling from the encounter in the lobby, she had made a decision. She was going to take down Amara, and she was going to do it publicly. She would expose the intern for what she was, a token hire, a distraction from the company's real priorities. The day after the meeting, Victoria sent a long, carefully crafted email to the executive board, filled with complaints about unqualified personnel being promoted based on diversity quotas. She was determined to create a paper trail that would discredit Amara before she could establish any real power. But what Victoria failed to consider was the one thing she had always overlooked. Amara wasn't just a token hire. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the hours passed, the emails piled up, but the quiet storm brewing behind the scenes was about to make itself known. Jasmine Williams, soon to be more than just an intern, had already laid the groundwork for what would become the most public takedown in corporate history. And this time, it would be Victoria Langston who would be left exposed, humiliated, and powerless to stop the avalanche of consequences she had just set in motion. It all came to a head in the next executive meeting, where the fate of Victoria's career would be sealed in front of an audience she had once considered beneath her. The room was filled with the usual power players of Sylvestre Corporation, but today, the air was thick with anticipation. Victoria's presentation began, filled with accusations of favoritism and unearned promotions. She even went so far as to suggest that the company's image was being tarnished by hiring unqualified interns to fill diversity quotas. As she spoke, Amara's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She knew exactly what she had prepared for. At the moment Victoria finished her accusations, Amara quietly tapped a button on her digital recorder. The sound of the recording device starting up was almost imperceptible, but in that instant, the power dynamics in the room shifted irrevocably. "Do you mind if we play something?" Amara asked calmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. She pressed play, and Victoria's voice echoed throughout the room, caught in an unguarded moment. "These diversity interns, they don't deserve promotions. They know nothing. They think they're entitled to everything." The room fell silent. Victoria's face drained of color as the recordings continued, revealing not just her words, but her true nature. With every clip played, her attempts to discredit Amara began to unravel. Each recording, each carefully documented moment, painted a picture of a woman who had been operating in a world of entitlement, blind to her own toxicity. The silence in the room was deafening as Victoria realized the full extent of the trap she had walked into. "What you're hearing, gentlemen," Amara's voice broke through the stillness, "are the words of someone who felt secure enough to speak freely, thinking that no one would ever hold her accountable for her actions." With each passing second, the reality of Victoria's downfall became more undeniable. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, some visibly shaken by what they had just heard. Victoria, Lawrence Sylvestre's voice was calm, but there was a coldness in his tone that sent a chill through the room. "You are terminated for cause. Security will escort you to clear your desk." Victoria's protests filled the room, but they were already falling on deaf ears. She had underestimated Amara, and in doing so, she had made the fatal mistake of assuming that her position would shield her from the consequences of her own actions. As the security team arrived, Amara watched silently, the weight of the moment settling over her. This wasn't just about her. This was about showing everyone that there were real consequences for the systems of discrimination and prejudice that had long been allowed to thrive unchecked. And as she walked out of that room, her head held high, Amara Grant knew that this was just the beginning. She had not only rewritten the script for her own life, but for the entire corporate world.